Africa is standing on a mountain of resources, and yet too often it's spoken on like a charity case. That contradiction is not accidental. It's cultural, it's psychological. And this week, the United Nations said it out loud. Not in a viral speech, not in a donor conference, but in a quiet interview that most people missed. Here's the line that changes the entire conversation. Africa doesn't have a million problems. Africa has one problem, a mindset problem. That's not social media bravado. That's the UN's top advisor on Africa. She said, Africa isn't poor. Africa is misframed. And remember, this channel exists for Africa First stories the Western media often ignores. We don't chase the headlines, we chase the truth behind them. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Africa's biggest leak isn't money, it's mindset. So let's check out exactly what she said.
First takeaway, we need all, particularly Africans, but all, to acknowledge that Africa has no 1 million problems. In my view, and this was clear in this conference, Africa has one problem, a mindset problem. Once we are able to tackle that problem, you will see that things will take a completely different direction. And to tackle the mindset problem, we need also to realize that African knowledge is a critical piece. All development conceptual frameworks, development trajectories regarding Africa, most of them have been designed, have been conceived using external outsource frameworks. Knowledge, African knowledge is a critical piece. Second takeaway, we need to recognize that Africa, despite almost 60 years of independent states, we found ourselves today as Africans, unfortunately, facing a nation-building challenge, a state-building challenge. Third takeaway, we need to recognize that with 1 and 2 needs to lead to Africa, a continent that basically controls its own resources. Let's take Africa's debt. I'm sure that you, Ben, and everybody that has read Africa's debt report in the past 15 years has read that Africa is in debt distress, spends more on debt service than education, else, etc. You have read that, I'm sure. And that the reason for that is because Africa is over-indebted. Yes, Africa is in debt distress, but Africa is not an over-indebted country. The reason behind Africa's debt distress is because Africa does not control its own economic and financial flows.
All right. So you heard her specifically say that Africa is not in control of its own resources, right? So this interview comes from Cristina Duarte, Under Secretary General of the United States, Special Advisor on Africa to the UN Secretary General. She was speaking after the 2025 Academic Conference on Africa, addressing policymakers and scholars shaping Africa's next 25 to 50 years. And instead of repeating the usual script of more aid, more loans, more apologies, she flipped the lens inward. She spoke directly to African states, African academies, and African institutions. So you could almost hear a Western think tank analyst say, wait, is Africa allowed to self-diagnose, right? So people think that this headline means another UN talk about Africa's problems. The truth is Africa loses 1.4 billion every single day, about 500 billion a year through inefficiencies and capital flight. At the same time, African governments aggressively pursue official development assistance, which equals barely 10% of that amount. So Africa is not over indebted. Africa is under controlled, right? So this matters for African identity and power because when you frame Africa as aid dependent, you design policies for dependency. When you frame Africa as capital leaking, you design policies for sovereignty. So a lot of times you'll hear Africa keeps asking for aid while it's bleeding wealth in silence, right? So That's like a billionaire checking couch cushions while money's falling out of their pockets, but we'll put that aside. So this matters because that missing $500 billion could finance industrial ecosystems, stabilize African currencies, and reduce IMF dependence. It could also build African-owned financial institutions, right? And in the previous African Power Report, we covered how capital flight quietly drains Africa's growth faster than any loan ever could. So this interview confirms that, right, at the UN level. So diaspora impact here is huge because remittances exceed $100 billion annually, right? More than foreign direct investment and aid combined. So Christina Duarte made this clear. These are not external flows. They come from Africans. So Ghanaians, Nigerians, Cape Verde, Somalis, right? So when Africans send money home to Africa, it's called remittances. When Europeans do it, it's called investment. So same money, different narrative, right? So the youth impact here is huge as well because over 85% of young Africans work in the informal sector. She said it plainly, right? Right now, Africa's youth bulge is not a dividend, it's a nightmare. So the solution that she came up with wasn't charity, it was ecosystems. And her most memorable line was, if you have a boab tree with Wi-Fi, just put STEM there, right? So the translation is you don't need Silicon Valley, you need sovereignty and a signal. So here's what's next, right? This story really turns powerful because by the year 2050, 4 out of 5 young people globally will be African, right? That's not a burden, that's leverage. And Christina Duarte also challenged Africa to stop importing narrow Western democratic models. So Africa already has consensus traditions, particularly governance, social responsibility, and she calls for a made in Africa democracy, right? Citizens built for Africa's realities, not donor templates. So here's the emotional truth, right? Africa's future will not be negotiated. It has to be claimed. And it starts the moment Africa believes its own balance sheet, right? So, mashallah, that's your African insight for today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because I'm Mr. Empower TV. We don't chase the headlines, we chase the truth behind them. This is Mr. Empower, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.